Next is a presentation of the preliminary budget of 2023 to 2024. We have Jason Tice here. I'll just start by saying thank you to all the department heads and Jason. We've been spending since about August, I think is when we start the process of the budget. This, just for everybody's notice, this is the preliminary one. It is going to look significantly different by the time it's actually voted on in March. This is our statutory obligation to get a budget out there. We've done our best guesses of what state revenues will be, what some things that we haven't gotten yet will be, based on some great trends that he does. Initial, there will be a lot of changes, I'm sure. Some things you might notice aren't in there because we haven't had our ARPA discussions. Right now we haven't put in like the strategic plan or the Chapter 20 drain, some of the things that we didn't put in there because they're possible ARPA, but if those don't end up with ARPA, we'll find a way to get them in here because again, this will all change by March, which is when we do our final budget and such. So, Jason, I'll give it off to you.
All right. Same format as last year. We'll spend a little bit of time going over the current year as of this point in time, and then we'll focus on next year's. So current year, we're doing really well for a few different reasons, but at this time, it's projected that we may have a surplus of just over $2 million between the general, road, and public safety fund combined after you net the interfund transfers between those. If that stays the course by the end of March, then I would likely recommend that excess or whatever excess or surplus there is be transferred into the equipment and replacement fund like we've done in some of the more recent years. That being said, that amount can change dramatically. Some of it's healthcare, some of it's vacant positions or at least vacant through part of the year. Part of it is last year we talked about $600,000 of stormwater projects. Those, for various reasons, the bulk of those costs have now been delayed to next budget year, 23-24. So that's part of the effects on this year, as well as state revenue sharing is coming in higher from sales tax revenue than was projected at the time of approving the budget. And a recent projection I got from the 48th District Court shows our caseload ratio going down, which actually affects both revenue and expenses, but in this case, it's actually helping us out in our current budget. Revenues, taxable value at this point, and that'll keep changing into February with MTT and tax tribunals and such, but it's 4.467. That's equated to a 5.1% net increase to the tax revenues after you factor in Headley. State revenue sharing projected to be higher, like I mentioned, by budget by about $500,000. Net investment earnings might be lower than budget. We're invested in a few different things, a government pool with the county. We've been buying T-bills and laddering those this year, and so we'll see where that all ends up at the end of March. We, like I said, had budgeted for a transfer from the equipment replacement fund to pay for that anticipated stormwater infrastructure. Since the bulk of those expenses will be in next year, that transfer in will not be occurring this year, so that those dollars will stay in that fund in the current year. On the expense side, contractually, there's 2.5% wage increases that occurred in this year. We've paid our defined benefit pension ADC payment, and with the latest report, we're at about 90% funded with that plan. On the OPEB side, contribution of $1.25 million was budgeted and paid, and that plan is about 22% funded now. 48th District Court, I expect the expenditures, based on the latest projection from the court, to be down about $500,000 from what I anticipated. And again, the stormwater project's not occurring this year. Healthcare is always a big topic and always one of our largest expenditures. Since going to self-funding a couple years ago, that's really driven by, or the bulk of it's driven by actual claims plus industry trend on medical and pharmacy. At this point, the forecast on healthcare for our plan is to be about 4% under budget for the current year. But through the first 7 months of our fiscal year this year, right now we're 16% under budget. I want to be a little conservative at this point because it can sway dramatically from one month to the next. So I could see where we get the numbers through November or December, and all of a sudden that 16% could be down to 12% or 8%. So it's hard to project this far out. This table was in here last year showing the same 4 columns you see in the preliminary budget. So where did we end up at our March 31, 22 actuals? What did we approve in the budget for the current year? What the forecast is for the current year? And then at this point, a very early preliminary forecast on where we'll be for next year, or what we should budget for next year. And then down below, to give you some percentages that go along with those dollar amounts. So, for example, the 2022 actuals of about 8.2 million, that was 4% under what we had budgeted for that year. 2023, before knowing what 2022 was going to really end up at when we adopted the new budget, was budgeted with a 7% increase over what was budgeted in 2022. So you got 2022, 4% under, and then the other one was 7%. So you actually had a like 11% spread between those 2 years. In 24, those numbers, the 9.488 million, has a 3.4% increase over the 2023 budget at this time. And we're just finishing up open enrollment. And then in hopefully early to mid-January, we'll have some solid premium rates, as well as a projection on what we should budget for claims on the self-funding side of it. Fund balance for those 3 main funds, just to kind of show you the trend. And the note that the general fund balance, we have that fund balance policy a few years ago adopted by the board. So currently the fund balance is at 67.1%, which is within the allowable 50 to 75% per the policy. Now looking at next year. Right now, preliminary budget is balanced with about a positive $200,000 across the general, road, and public safety. There's a lot of assumptions yet at this point, including the court and the healthcare. Those are gonna change and be refined between now and March, when we come back and have another presentation and possibly a study session before that. Inflation rate came in at 7.9%, but with Proposal A in state of Michigan, we're capped at only realizing 5% of that gain. And when I looked at the rates since Proposal A began in 1994, this is the first and only time that we've gotten to that 5% cap. So in revenues, we have taxable value projection going up to 4.75 billion, equating to a 3.4% net increase to tax revenues after Headley rollbacks. So the downside to Headley and Proposal A and this inflation is that the bigger that inflation number, like the 5% that we're going to get, the larger the effect of the rollbacks. So we don't quite get everything you think we're going to get, because we're going to have while we're getting the largest increase on the front side, we're going to have the largest rollback we've ever had. This was the first year collecting the combined, this will be the first year collecting the combined public safety millage renewals that provide approximately an additional $2.75 million. That'll be in the winter tax bills about a year from now. At this point, I'm expecting a 2% decrease in state revenue sharing. That's going to change. They haven't released any updated projections from the state yet. The court is, we just got a paper copy, and we have a budget meeting with them coming up soon. So at the time I prepared this, I didn't have much to go on, but once we have that meeting and work with them some more, I can dial in a better number on both the revenue and expense side is where the court will stand. And they're a calendar year, fiscal year, so that throws some wrenches into the projections as well. Anticipating an increase to investment earnings from current year now that we have these T-bills laddering out, and as they mature, we've been purchasing more. We have less in the local government investment pool. That one's lagging behind the rates that are being offered. So we're moving the money to where the highest rates are as we find them. Fire department will receive and fully book the $500,000 state grant revenue that was awarded for to go towards a SOAR truck purchase. But if you remember, while that was all in the works and being applied for, the estimate came back, or quote, and the truck came in at about $825,000. So there's a difference of $325,000 that has to be made up. So in this version of the budget, I have that $325,000 coming from the equipment fund to help make up that difference to purchase that SOAR truck. On the expense side, the contracts, there's 2% wage increases in that coming year. Healthcare, as I said earlier, is increasing a few percentage points at this point, but we've been tracking really well since the changes that have been made to the plans and going to self-funding. The defined benefit pension ADC payment of about $4.6 million. If you were to look back at the other slide, it was slightly higher. So this will be the first year that I've seen in my time here that ADC payment has actually gone down. So we may have gotten to the peak, and hopefully that trend will continue going down in the future, which will help all the budgets. The OPEB contribution staying with the same $1.25 million. That's been the plan, and that's been approved by the MSB. Recently, fuel costs are starting to come down at the pumps, but at least for this point, I'm assuming they'll stay the same as what we budgeted in the current year. And this will be a extraordinary year for capital outlay. Right now, if you add it all up, it's about $4.7 million just across these three funds. So included in those expenditures, a total of 12 positions have been brought back. The majority in public safety. Obviously, that's where the voters approved the millage. And so we have 5 coming back to police. That's 2 sergeants, 2 patrol, and an AWO, or animal welfare officer. 4 to fire, operations officer that hasn't been filled or budgeted in a while, as well as 3 unit firefighter / EMS personnel. So they have 3 units that are staffed at any given point in time. So you want to have the same number in each unit. So you basically need to increase by 3 or 6 or 9, however you're doing it. The bringing back one of the full-time ordinance officer positions. There's an election specialist position that's been part-time for a long time, and that's looking to be converted to become a full-time. And then township engineer, while it was recently approved in 22-23, I think just a few board meetings ago, with other things that have occurred, that will be delayed to 23-24. So I'm counting that for next year.
And just a little step in to tell you something, how quickly things can change. Even with the ordinance officer, now we're debating, do we do one full-time or do we do 2 part-time? Because as everyone knows, some people put their stuff out on Thursday night through Sunday knowing there's no weekend ordinance. So we're discussing the idea of, do we do a full-time or do we do part-time, and the people cover Monday through Thursday and the other ones Wednesday through Sunday, so that we would have coverage to actually, when people are doing things on construction sites that they shouldn't on a Saturday, there'd be somebody to reply to it. So that, even that has changed just since a couple weeks ago when we finalized this. So that's why when we say this, all of our inputs will also go in on this too. There'll be changes.
Next couple slides go through the larger, it's not all inclusive. I tried to keep it to the large projects or capital items for the slides. So the stormwater capital projects, the Maxwell tank and Watercliff are now projected to be more like 1.15 million in capital, as opposed to the 600,000. So that's included in this version. The town hall HVAC, 100,000. 48th District Court rooftop unit, 150. So just as a reminder, there's certain things with the court that we as the landlord are responsible for, which are most of the infrastructure and outside type things on the walls and ceilings, infrastructure, as opposed to if they want to renovate a bathroom or room interior, that would then fall on the court to fund. The lightning protection, years ago, there was an assessment done and some work done on all the buildings, but not everything was completed. So I think they're calling this maybe phase 2 of lightning protection on a few buildings. And then the EOC, there's some requests to upgrade the equipment and audiovisual and things in the EOC. And then 2 vehicles, one for ordinance to take out, and then one as a general motor pool that is available for anyone in the township that needs access to a motor pool car, would be replaced. On the road fund, the next phase for the brine system, a hot box trailer, and then we'll switch to public safety. A little bit longer list because you have some large departments, police and fire here. There's always replacements for police vehicles. This year will be higher than in the past. Typically there's 4 to 5. This year they have 7 that'll be replaced. The detention cell door lock upgrades, which are where the holding cells basically, those are still, from what I'm told, are still manual physical keys, key locks. So upgrade those to something more secure and more able to be monitored. Some software for traffic recreation, some radar trailers. Talked about the SOAR truck. 2 rescue trucks, those have already been approved because of the build time. That came to the board probably earlier this year. So as long as that stays on track, those would be delivered and paid for a total of $514,000 in the coming budget year. There's a fire administration vehicle to be replaced. And then the 5 power stretchers are ready to be replaced, along with 4 CPR devices, a Jaws of Life set, And then there's a grant that they're applying for the fire department for workout equipment. So the cost would be $53,000, but they would get a grant of $47,000. And if the grant doesn't get approved, then they wouldn't move forward with that purchase. So some of the things that are still kind of hanging out there that we need to button down over the next few months. Property taxes will continue to change those projections as we move forward. State revenue sharing as the state releases updates. The 48th District Court revenues and expenses aren't finalized. And then, of course, ARPA on both sides. I know there's a scheduled session for the board to discuss more. So at this point, I have 0 ARPA dollars in revenue as well as in expense, because there's nothing for me to base any of that on yet at this point. Down below with the bullet points, those are potential projects that I believe are planned to be done in the 23-24 year. It's just there's no solid quotes or estimates as to what those could be. So, you know, I don't know what dollar amount to plan for at this point, and we're going to want to get those figured out by February. So the Chapter 20 drain study, a strategic plan for the township as a whole, document management solution for the township, and then there's some scanning to be done for central storage to get rid of some of the files there. All of those would entail hiring somebody from the outside, a consultant or a contractor, or possibly both, to get those completed. And then lastly, right now, the only use of the equipment and replacement fund I have included is the $325,000 gap for the SOAR truck for fire. But the 4 bullet points above that, I think, could add up to well into 6 figures, if not 7 figures. So as those get quoted, I think we're going to have to pull something from the equipment and replacement fund at that point.
Just to give you an idea of some of these costs, and that's why we didn't want to put them in if they are ending up on ARPA, because they would have thrown quite a bit out of the budget. Like a strategic plan could be likely over $100,000, but the document storage, we did get some on the, that's a 2-phase project, where first you have to get the person who helps you create the infrastructure versus the person who really scans. And we did, thanks to Tom's project for his master's, get some bids, and those ranged, how many hundreds of thousands?
200 to 300,000.
So 200 to 300,000 just to create the infrastructure. Then the central storage scanning would be once you show people where to put all these documents to scan them. Some were a 3-year project, some were 10 years, but it was 300 to 700,000? Something like that. So these are large, significant ones that could throw off everything else. So if they aren't in ARPA, that's fine. Then we will figure out things. But we also didn't want to, before we know what these other finals are, throw them in there, because one of those could basically throw off the whole budget right away. So those are ones that we know we need. We just don't know how we're going to do it yet, and we'll find the right way once we all work together on those. Those are some big ones.
That's it from me. Any questions?
I know we have our budget study session in December for some big ones, but I know as a trustee in particular, some of these things, like I didn't know what a Chapter 20 drain was. If you want to ask some questions too on just what some of these things are, feel free, or we can wait till December. Whatever you'd like.
Thank you, as always, for your presentation.
Yeah.
So I guess probably an easy question, not a big one, but you've got 2 vehicles. So one is, I guess, new, one is a replacement.
I believe they're both replacements.
Oh, okay. So then that's like the upfront purchase, and we would purchase them. And then on the other side of your balance sheet, they would the cars would get resold or goes back into through your
Some
pool
are
system?
new. Some are new because there's new positions.
Well, I think you're talking about, since you said two, I assumed you meant the two general fund, the motor pool and
You
ordinance.
said there was one to be replaced and one for the new ordinance officer. So I didn't know if that was one replaced, one new, or two, but whatever.
So those specifically are both replacements. And so then depending on, motor pool manages mileage and resale value, and if there's a spot to where they, like a low use that they can move it to a different department, they assess all that and determine if it should be sold or moved or what.
So the 90,000 for two vehicles is basically the purchase of roughly
That's the purchase price, yeah.
245,000.
Yep.
So it's, okay, so that's where that's coming from. And then if the end use is to sell them, then that would be on the other side of the balance
That'd be
sheet.
a revenue, yep.
Revenue,
And I
okay.
typically don't budget for those. It's hard to say when something's going to be sold and for how much, but we
Right.
do pretty well.
Right, okay, thank you.
There will be some new vehicles because with the new traffic patrol coming back and some of these new
the
officers,
officers.
those would need new, where they would now be a new line item on our fleet.
Well, sure.
So I did just have one thing that popped out at me, and I don't know if you want to wait until December for this, but under elections for the miscellaneous expenses, we had for this year 1,147 roughly, but then we're projecting 10,000 for the coming budget. So I was just wondering why you think it'll be so much more. And like
I let the gentlemen handle their own department, so I have no,
Gotcha.
I wouldn't want the expert, I want the experts talking. So here's your expert elections man.
So just so I'm clear, you're looking at the fees for service?
No, it says a miscellaneous expense under the election. Here, let me see what page it is on this.
And we're heading
for
into
extra
basically a
training.
non-election.
At the end, when we were
Right.
done.
So I think it's page, oh, well, you,
Oh, hang on, let me put my glasses on. I brought these out for a reason. Oh my goodness, it looks so much more clear.
it's towards the bottom. It's,
Count
activity number
956?
956, yeah.
Oh, there it is. So 956 miscellaneous expense on elections or no, you're
Yes,
saying clerks?
Under elections, yep.
'Cause that's 1,000.
No, under elections, not clerk.
I'm looking at under elections. Wait a minute.
Is it the, I don't have it in front of me, is it the far right column?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the far right column.
Nothing's coming to mind.
Right, so we did adjust the fee for service,
Oh,
at our
okay,
last
so-
meeting,
so the,
which is 809 to
So actually,
$10,000.
to answer your question, the far right says 1,000 for 2024
Right.
preliminary budget, but then for the 2023 amended budget, it says 10,000, and then for the estimated, it says 7,500.
Okay, that
Right.
makes more sense.
Right, okay.
It was,
Well-
it goes up in the election year. So it went
Oh,
up to
okay.
10,000.
Got
It's
it.
likely to be more like 7,500. Now next year it'll go back down to 1.
Yes, there won't be much of anything next year election.
Right.
Well, right, so we don't know for sure, but just so we're clear, yeah, the 10,000 was last year's budget. We're on track to spend about 7,500. And that covers all sorts of things that we just, unanticipated expenses, unanticipated printing, unanticipated other kinds of things that come up because we're running the election. And in this coming year, we're not planning on election. However, there may be one. Stay tuned, maybe in the middle of December, one of our school districts may decide to put an item on the May ballot.
But that would come from their budget, not.
It would.
They fully reimburse us, correct?
As long as there's nothing from the township, they would fully reimburse us for that. So there'd be an in and out, that these numbers would change. And
So when we combined ours, we took away the extra cost that a township would pay, but the school district still needs to possibly have one, but then we wouldn't pay for any of that.
Okay, they'll be responsible, great.
It's just a
Thank you.
pass-through.
So while we're talking about it, I might as well highlight another area above where Danny and I were talking about the $10,000. So it's in the fee-for-service section above that, under 809. So last year, we had budgeted $115,000, but we have spent $85,000 so far. And that's, I think, is pretty much including what we spent for November.
Yeah, it would.
So fee-for-service is all of the election workers that come in and assist us, and we did a good job at managing that time and training. But you might notice that in an off year last year, we put in like $100, I mean $90. We're putting in $10,000 for this coming year. The plan is to spend off election year time to increase the amount of training, to keep it fresh during an off year for both my staff and for the fee-for-service folks that come in. So that's why that might be a little bit higher than usual, but.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Jason.
Okay.
All right, and then I believe we're having in February, we'll have our budget study session, so.
Right, as December is the study session for ARPA.
So we're having, first we want the ARPA in case anything is figured out in December, January, and we do decide on anything, then we know how that will be spent so we can better affect questions during the budget, the general fund and the others.
Yeah, I don't think we still haven't come up with that February meeting date yet. I know we were kicking that one around.
Yeah.
Somebody's making it complicated.
Somebody travels a lot. I want your life. But yeah, so we'll have the December 7th ARPA study session and then a February budget one, which will also give time for everybody to ask questions. The department heads are willing to answer any questions you have too if you want to learn more about some of these things. They'll just give people more time. All right, thank you.
Still here.
You don't want to go. All right. Next, we have consider the. Oh, do we have to actually vote to accept the preliminary budget?
I don't believe
No.
so.
Okay. Right? No.
It's nothing formal.
I think it's just present. Okay.